Fire Red and Leaf Green, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. So far, Game Freak has remade 3 generations of Pokemon games, and while there's certainly some things that could have been done better in these remakes, for the most part they've been met with incredible positivity. Because after all, who doesn't like seeing their childhood remastered and revamped? It's pretty easy to see that people love seeing the Pokemon games remade, and as such, ever since Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire came out, people have been asking the all-important question, will the next games in line, Diamond and Pearl, receive remakes as well? Well, if you ask me, while there's no official word as of yet, I recently found a couple of anomalies in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, as well as in the sales patterns of the Pokemon games, that makes me almost certain that these remakes are going to happen at some point. In other words, the Diamond and Pearl remakes are essentially all but confirmed. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to try and convince you guys why I think this is the case. First, I want to start with the incredibly obvious argument that all of the first 3 generations so far have had remakes. In 2004, we had Fire Red and Leaf Green as remakes for Gen 1, then in 2009, we had Heart Gold and Soul Silver as remakes for Gen 2, and finally in 2014, we had Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire as the remakes for Gen 3. So it's pretty clear at this point that Game Freak likes the idea of making remakes for older generations. Meaning, if their past behavior is anything to judge by, Sinnoh remakes are probably going to happen. However, I'm sure all of you have already deduced this by now, so let me go ahead and move on to something a little more convincing. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, if you go to the Lily Cove Art Museum, you'll find 2 rather strange and out-of-place paintings. The first of these paintings is actually one of Giratina, and the second painting is one of Arceus. I apologize if they're a bit hard to see, by the way, so I'll link them down in the description in case you want to check them out for yourself and zoom in on them a little. Now, if you think about it, this is beyond strange, because obviously the original Gen 3 games did not have these pictures, meaning Game Freak deliberately put these pictures into the Lily Cove Art Museum when making Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And why in all hell would they put 2 of the flagship Pokemon for 4th generation in this art museum, when if anything 4th gen is the least pertinent thing to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire? Pokemon games have always had 1st and 2nd gen references, and referencing Gen 6 makes sense since Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are part of the same generation, but a reference to 4th gen is just really out of the blue. So either this is some incredibly strange coincidence, or Game Freak is teasing the Sinnoh remakes. Finally, I've got one more slightly complicated but rather convincing argument, so if you guys bear with me here, I think you'll agree by the end of the video that the Sinnoh remakes are probably gonna happen. On screen, I'm gonna show you guys a table of the sales for all the main series Pokemon games ever released. The first thing I want to point out is that if you look at the sales for the remakes, there's generally an upward trend. Fire Red and Leaf Green sold around 12 million copies, Heart Gold and Soul Silver sold 12.72 million, and finally Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire sold 11.46 million, but keep in mind this information is from 2015, meaning Oras sold that much in only 1 year. So I would say that given time, the sales for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire will either surpass or at the very least be close to that of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which gives us an upward trend in sales for the remakes. So the point is that remakes of previous generations are still selling quite a bit and doing very well, and from a business perspective, if something is gaining in popularity, then you should keep doing it. Which means that when the Pokemon company sits down to talk about Sinnoh remakes, this will be a huge factor in swaying their decision towards going through with these remakes. Also, take a look at the sales of the initial releases for each generation. In other words, take a look at the sales for Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, Ruby and Sapphire, Diamond and Pearl, Black and White, and finally X and Y. For the most part, we see a downward trend in sales as the generations progress on. Between Gens 1 and 2, we had a decrease from 31.38 million to 23.10 million. Then, between Gens 2 and 3, sales decreased from 23.1 million to 16.22 million. Between Gens 4 and 5, we had a decrease from 17.63 million to 15.60 million. And finally, between Gens 5 and 6, we had a decrease from 15.6 million to 14.46 million. However, there is one exception to this trend, and that is Generation 4. As you guys can see, for the only time in history, sales rose between 3rd generation and 4th generation from 16.22 million to 17.63 million. And I'm sure you guys are all asking at this point, what does it all mean? Well, it means that 4th gen was really popular. In general, sales trends like this persist, but for whatever reason, Diamond and Pearl violated the trend. Which is incredibly strange when you think about it, because Pokemon is a franchise based on nostalgia to some extent, so it makes sense for the first few generations to sell a lot, but it doesn't really make as much sense for 4th generation to sell so well. Implying that once again, this is no coincidence, Diamond and Pearl were truly popular. As such, when the Pokemon company looks back at their sales, they're gonna see this and realize how good an opportunity the Sinnoh remakes are for them. Because a lot of people are definitely gonna go out and buy them. Also, it makes absolutely no sense to do remakes for Ruby and Sapphire, but not Diamond and Pearl, when Diamond and Pearl sold better than Ruby and Sapphire. So judging by the sales of past Pokemon games, there's no way in hell Game Freak isn't remaking 4th generation. Which pretty much means one thing and one thing only, Sinnoh Confirmed. Well, alright folks, that is pretty much gonna do it for this video. As always, if you enjoyed, be sure to drop me a like down below and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more Pokemon videos in the future. Also, be sure to let me know your thoughts on the Sinnoh remakes. For one, do you want them to happen? And for two, do you think they're going to happen? Otherwise, I hope you all have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.